Chicago. Valentine's morning. A garage door on North Clark creaks open, and 7 men are lined against a brick wall by 2 police and 2 men in coats. Bursts of Tommy gun fire echo down the block. When the smoke clears, only a dog is howling, and the city has a new word for fear. So I'll start with who they were, and where this began. North Side gangmen used the SMC Cartage garage at 2122 North Clark Street as a daytime base. Books, trucks, a mechanic at work, a place to wait for deliveries. George Bugs Moran was their boss. Across town, the South Side empire known by one name, Capone, ran beer routes, speakeasies, and muscle. The year was 1929. Prohibition had turned sugar, trucks, and timing into money. Radios buzzed, typewriters clacked, and everyone knew which corners to avoid after dark. Winter made the air sharp. Men wore heavy coats and flat caps. Bookkeepers counted. Drivers checked tires. Lookouts smoked on the sidewalk. The garage dog, Highball, heard every footstep. A few doors down, neighbors kept their heads low and their eyes open. In this city, police uniforms could mean safety, or a problem you didn't want to have. Moran himself liked to arrive late and leave fast. Adam Heyer kept the books. Frank and Peter Gusenberg handled muscle. Albert Kachelek, called James Clark. Albert Weinshank. Reinhard Schwimmer, the optometrist who wanted to feel important. And Johnny May, the mechanic. These names would matter by noon. On paper, the garage was routine. In reality, it was a live wire. Behind this picture, ledger lines, truck schedules, quiet mornings, something dark was waiting. Not a shouted threat, a plan that needed a car that looked official, uniforms that fit, and guns that spoke louder than questions. The first sign was small, but it stayed with me. A phone call about a cheap shipment that sounded too good. A black car seen circling North Clark more than once. A neighbor who said 2 men in overcoats looked inside and didn't look away. In a city of deliveries, small oddities can hide in the noise. The World's Fair was still years away, but Chicago already felt like a stage, bright, fast, and crowded with actors in hats. Valentine's Day landed on a Thursday that year. People bought flowers. Speakeasies chilled beer quietly behind back doors. The garage clock ran like always. A note in someone's pocket. A delivery time whispered the night before. An order to be in by 10:30 a.m. All of it felt normal until it didn't. Investigators would later say one detail didn't fit. The calm way a police car slid to the curb right on time. It shouldn't have felt normal. It did. That brings me to the hours before everything changed. February 14, 1929. The city woke under a thin layer of cold. At the garage, Johnny May tightened bolts on a car with Highball tied nearby. Heyer checked papers. Schwimmer lingered to be seen. Weinshank came in wearing a coat that made him look like someone else. James Clark nodded hello. The Gusenberg brothers stepped in and out, voices low. Moran was late. He often was. He would later say he saw the police at the door from down the block and turned away. That's the kind of thing lateness can save you from once in a lifetime. From 10:20 to 10:30 a.m., the routine played on. A truck rolled past. A florist made a run. The dog shifted on his chain and listened. The garage was busy enough to seem safe, quiet enough to hear footsteps. The plan, if there was one, was already in motion. One routine step didn't happen that day. Nobody called ahead to confirm a real raid, and no one asked to see a warrant before they obeyed the uniforms. And then came the moment the quiet broke. A car that looked like a police car stopped outside. 2 men in uniforms stepped in with authority. 2 men in coats followed with cases. "Line up," someone said. "Hands on the wall," someone else said. The 7 men, used to pressure and quick orders, did what men do when badges walk in. Highball barked. The men didn't move. The uniforms checked the line like it was a roll call. At first everything looked like a raid. Standard, sharp, over in minutes. Until a detail changed the case forever. The cases snapped open, and out came Thompson submachine guns. Because the next minute is when it happens. Because the next minute is when it happens. The garage filled with short, hard bursts from Tommy guns, then the boom of a shotgun to finish what the bursts began. The brick wall caught bullets. The floor caught bodies. Frank Gusenberg slumped but still breathed. Highball screamed in a dog's way, high and helpless. Outside, neighbors froze, then pretended not to hear what they had just heard. Inside, the men in uniform did one more thing to seal the picture. They marched the men in coats out with hands up, as if arrested, so anyone who glanced through the door would see nothing but police doing police work. They left in the same car they came in. At first everything looked over, fast, clean, and gone, until one detail remained: the brass on the floor and the pattern on the wall. Clues everywhere. I leaned closer and saw the first clear clue. I leaned closer and saw the first clear clue. 45 caliber casings from at least 2 Thompson guns. The second clue was a shotgun blast that read like a period at the end of a sentence. The third clue was how the bodies were arranged, lined up, execution style, not a scuffle gone wrong. Who found them? Not a detective. A delivery man pushed through the door and stopped in a world that didn't move. He ran. He called. Police arrived. Reporters were not far behind. The city inhaled and didn't exhale for hours. The clue raised a question no one could answer yet. If uniforms did this, whose uniforms were they? Then someone said, "Check the survivor." Then someone said, "Check the survivor." We did. Then someone said, "Check the survivor." We did. Frank Gusenberg was still alive when officers reached him. They asked who shot him. He said, "No one shot me." That line tells you everything and nothing. Loyalty, fear, code. He died soon after. Highball kept howling until someone cut the rope and let him out. Families started to arrive, and so did names. Wineshank, mistaken for Moran at first glance. James Clark. Heyer, Schwimmer, Johnny May, Peter Gusenberg, Frank Gusenberg. The wall would later be stripped brick by brick for souvenirs. The moment itself didn't need souvenirs. It was already carved into the city. "This looks like Capone," someone said before the ink on the logbook dried. Capone, however, was in Florida, hoping distance could be an alibi. Jack McGurn, a South Side hitter, was whispered down the hall. Moran spat his own sentence. "Only Capone kills like that." That's when the room went silent, and we realized what we were standing in. That's when the room went silent, and we realized what we were standing in. The crime scene of the decade. Detectives chalked outlines, bagged casings, measured angles. Photographers took pictures that would travel the world. Outside, Valentine's Day felt like any other winter day. Inside, it felt like the century had tipped. We thought we knew what a gang shooting looked like. Cars, drive-bys, a blur of motion. We didn't. This was theater, using badges as props and guns as punctuation. By the time the police arrived, the real work was just starting. By the time the police arrived, the real work was just starting. By the time the police arrived, the real work was just starting. Chicago police and state's attorneys pulled witness statements, tracked cars that looked like squad cars, and checked uniform suppliers. The crime lab took the casings and bullets to a new kind of mind. Ballistics. Calvin Goddard used a comparison microscope. You could hold a bullet from the scene beside a test bullet and see if the scratches matched like fingerprints. The media turned the city into a rumor mill. One paper said Detroit men did it. Another said St. Louis men. A third said Capone bought the police car and the badges. Some details were mishandled. People trampled the garage before the tape went up. Reporters stood where detectives should have stood. One procedure wasn't followed, and it would haunt the case. Still, a spine formed. 2 Thompsons, 1 shotgun, fake raid, clean exit. Then the focus shifted to who had those Thompsons in the months before and after. Then the focus shifted to the guns, and where they'd been. Then the focus shifted to the guns, and where they'd been. Late 1929 in St. Joseph, Michigan, a traffic stop ended with an officer shot. The suspect fled, leaving a trail to a man. who used many names, often called Fred Killer Burke. In his bungalow, police found 2 Thompson submachine guns with drums, stacks of .45 ammo, and a ballistics starter kit a gangster shouldn't have had. Goddard test-fired those Thompsons. The striations matched the Valentine's casings. The guns were right. The city whispered the names Burke, Winkler, Ray, and other gunmen tied to Egan's rats and Midwestern crews. McGurn remained a local favorite suspect for planning. But matching guns wasn't the same as naming hands. Alibis, girlfriends on the stand, and distance kept paper from turning into handcuffs. But investigators soon discovered something that didn't make sense. If the guns were Goddard matched, why did the case still feel empty? Because evidence pointed to weapons and circles, not to faces in that room. And that discovery forced a new look at what could be proved, and what only guessed. And that discovery forced a new look at what could be proved, and what only guessed. Capone sat in Florida on Valentine's morning. McGurn had an alibi from Louise Rolfe, the blonde alibi who told a story the jury couldn't crack. Burke was convicted, but for the Michigan cop killing, not for the garage. No one ever stood before a judge for the massacre itself. Experts explained the lab work on the radio in simple words: barrel marks, ejector marks, magazine scratches. How metal writes on metal. The public learned what ballistics could prove and what it couldn't. The case now had 2 paths, and only one could be right. A named crew we could indict, or a named method we could only point at. Chicago got the method. It didn't get the crew. Then, just when it cooled down, another headline hit. Capone wasn't charged for the massacre, but he was indicted for tax evasion. Different case, same shadow. Then, just when it cooled down, a new headline arrived from another courtroom. Then, just when it cooled down, a new headline arrived from another courtroom. 1931. Capone went down on tax charges. It didn't answer Valentine's, but it changed the board. McGurn? He caught lead in 1936, shot dead in a bowling alley on his own Valentine's Day. Burke went to prison for life in Michigan and died there. The lab match answered what guns. It created 3 more questions. Who held them? Who planned it? And who wore the uniforms? The city's memory kept circling the same 4 images: the fake police, the lineup, the Tommy guns, the dog. The names around the edges blurred. The center would not. So we followed the trail to where the case stands now. The twist isn't a surprise confession. It's the limit of what the evidence could hold. Ballistics tied the weapons. Stories tied the motive. Moran versus Capone, beer wars, a misidentified coat that made Wineshank look like Moran. But no courtroom ever said, "These men, on this date, in those uniforms." Everyone thought this was the end. Maybe it was the middle, because every few years a new book tries the door again. Which brings me to where the case stands tonight. Status: unsolved perpetrators. 7 dead at 2122 N. Clark on February 14, 1929. Method: fake police raid, 2 Thompsons plus shotgun. Staged exit. Ballistics: 2 Thompson SMGs recovered from Fred Burke's bungalow, matched to the scene by Calvin Goddard. Suspects: Capone, in Florida that day; Jack McGurn, alibi; Midwestern gunman with ties to Egan's rats. Result: no convictions for the massacre. Case became a symbol of Prohibition-era violence and pushed cities toward modern forensics. A quiet brick wall turned into a national lesson. Uniforms can lie. Lab work doesn't, but even lab work has edges. Now it's your turn. What detail speaks loudest to you? The fake raid tactic, the Tommy gun patterns, the ballistics match, or the alibis that held just enough? Was Moran the target, or was the message the point? Drop your theory below, and tell me if you want a part 2, where we map the minute-by-minute timeline on a North Clark Street map and compare suspect crews side by side. I'll keep the page open until the truth walks in.